Um, Thank you. And now moving on to the more interesting part of the meeting is our urban trees, their benefits and challenges. And I want to thank our three presenters for sharing their expertise and their time with us tonight. Scott Altenhoff is the Urban Forestry Management Analyst with the City of Eugene. Ian Appow is a co-founder of ECO-System Solutions. And Ian, when it's your time up, please feel free to share a little bit more about your organization. And Erik Burke is the Eugene Director for Friends of Trees. And so we have kind of invited them to have their presentation interweave with each other. So they'll be moving back and forth rather than just a single presentation. And we're going to have Q&A at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to add your questions to the chat, and then we will read them out. And if we need further explanation, we'll ask you to speak. Are there, and we'll save at least 20 minutes for that part of it. So does that make sense to folks? If anybody with questions about the process?
I don't see how one does a chat comment.
It should be down at the bottom of your screen, or you can right click if you have three little dots on your picture. But if you don't figure it out, raise your hand and we'll call on you.
Okay, very good.
Yeah. All right. Well, I will turn it over. Scott, do you want to kind of take the lead on this?
Sure. I'll start things off, and just want to thank you for allowing us to speak tonight on the topic of trees. We always really appreciate conducting grassroots efforts to let folks know what we're doing and to listen to what your concerns are so that we can remain relevant. Thank you, Erik and Ian, for taking part in tonight's discussion. I have a slideshow prepared, but I would like to invite Erik and Ian to jump in if you see something that comes to mind that you'd like to add. Just chime right in and we'll include you. I'd like to move quickly through the slideshow, the canned part of the presentation, and really focus on topics that are of interest or concern to you all, so to personalize it as much as possible. I'd also like to recognize that we are on the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people, and I always like to recognize that fact and be as intentional as possible that I always strive to live in harmony with the landscape. And I think it's essential that we recognize that we have displaced people that did have a relationship with the land that we don't. And we're facing very grave problems that result from our perspective and our approach to life. So just want to acknowledge that fact and be as intentional in our efforts as possible. With that said, I will share my screen like this and begin the presentation. Is that visible to everyone? Excellent.
Yes.
Yes. So here's a lovely aerial view of Eugene looking to the south. And as I suspect you all know, one of the defining characteristics of our city, what makes it so livable and so appealing relative to so many other cities, is undoubtedly our fantastic tree population. And I know I'm biased, but I've never heard anyone push back on that fact. So we'll take that as a given. And let's see, come on. There we go. So my objectives tonight are to or about 4. I'd like to provide you all with a brief overview of who we are as a work group. That is the City of Eugene's Urban Forestry Group. There is a lot of confusion about roles and responsibilities and areas of authority when it comes to trees in Eugene. It's possible to parse out geographically and by organization and such. So I hope to make some sense of who does what or who is focused on what areas of our urban forest. Secondly, let you know what our work group does, and conversely, what our work group is not able to do or doesn't do, so that there's no confusion there. Thirdly, I'd like to let you know what we're working on in terms of trying to promote sustainability and general livability in Eugene via trees and green infrastructure, and how we partner with organizations like Friends of Trees and with organizations like ECO-Systems, ECO-System Yin's group to do a variety of endeavors. And lastly, I'd like to explore ways that we can mutually support one another's efforts. That is at the neighborhood level, fans' efforts in all that you do, and let you know how you might be able to contribute to our endeavors. Anything that you'd like to add, Erik or Ian, in terms of objectives or goals tonight?
Nope, I think you got it. Keep it rolling.
Very good.
Go on, Scott. Sounds good.
Very quickly, Eugene Urban Forestry is part of Parks and Open Space, which is a division within the Public Works Department of the City of Eugene. Basically, the City of Eugene has 7 departments ranging from police and fire and emergency services to public works, planning, and I know I'm going to forget a couple essentials. Anyway, those are a few of the 7 departments that we have, and urban forestry is part of Parks and Open Space. Our budget this year is about $2.5 million, which sounds to my ears like a whole lot of money. However, when you really get into the details and translate that into number of staff people, we've currently got 10 staff people, and our funding is broken up into several groups or categories. The 59.1% that you see on the screen there is predominantly road fund. So we receive tax receipts from our road fund, gas tax receipts. And that has, during the pandemic, dwindled a bit. So we're definitely feeling the pinch. 35.9% of our funding comes from stormwater funds. And together, those 2 funds comprise the vast majority of our funding. We do have some contractual services funds for 1.3%, and then some general funds. But as mentioned, the vast majority of our funding comes from road funds. As mentioned, we're a team of 10 dedicated professionals, and we definitely pride ourselves on being good-natured and service-oriented and responsive and engaging. We don't like to operate within traditional bureaucratic silos. We like to operate as fellow neighbors and community members. And I think it's fair to say that the folks who know us see that as well. Anything to add, Erik or Ian?
No, I think that's good, and I'll have plenty more, I think, to add on as we go.
Great.
That's great.
The services that we provide are as follows, and please keep in mind that these are all public trees. As we'll explore briefly later, we can parse our tree population, our urban forest in Eugene. The easiest category or clefting that we can do is public and private trees. And our work group, Urban Forestry, as you'll see later, is focused on street trees. We work and partner with our fellow Parks and Open Space folks to manage and care for park trees as well. But our work group, the 10 of us, our area of focus are street trees. And I'll later on really help define what constitutes a street tree. But very quickly, our primary focus is definitely tree hazard response. So when we have storms, when we have wind events, ice events, we really, our primary focus is to keep things safe for users of our transportation system. We also recognize that responsive work is not enough and it's not very cost effective. We want to move upstream and deal with problems before they're problems. So we do a lot of tree maintenance as proactively as possible. We also conduct a lot of tree planting and establishment. We do that in-house and with our agency partners, but we also rely very, very heavily on Friends of Trees as a grassroots nonprofit organization and partner. We also focus on a lot of tree preservation and tree protection and consulting efforts. And then one of the greatest threats to our urban forest on private property, but also with street trees is relates to infill development and general development pressure. So we do a lot of development plan review and regulation. And then lastly, we do a lot of tree appraisals and evaluation and damage recovery. I'm sure you've all seen trees that have been damaged or entirely removed as a result of auto accidents, drunk drivers, and vandalism. And so that's really the bulk of what we do. I will say at this point that in contrast to a lot of problems that are simple or straightforward, because our urban forest is not just a ecological or natural resource-based system, we have what we refer to as a complex social ecological system. And when you have complex social ecological systems, your problems tend to be wicked. That's not a judgment about ethics or morals. It's a term that's used for problems which, as shown here, aren't straightforward and aren't benign by nature. There are complex feedback loops that it's not as simple as fixing one problem, because when you make interventions in one area, it has there are feedback loops and reverberations throughout the system. So as folks who are involved with your neighborhood association, I know you know what that entails or involves. It's not as easy as going and talking to a neighbor or simply fixing one thing. You have to contend with a number of factors. So I just like to point that out. As folks know, our streetscape and our treescape are a defining feature of our transportation corridors. This is Jefferson Street. This is actually the JWN neighborhood, but it's just so iconic and so characteristic of what we all value in Eugene. And studies have shown that trees aren't just niceties on the landscape. They really contribute and dictate how we people feel, how we behave, and how we think. So we're really trying to take that into consideration when we plan and plant and maintain our trees. They're not just niceties, they really are necessities for our social structure, for our economic structure, and for our environmental systems as well. I've already referred to this or walked around this issue, but a sustainable urban forest isn't just about trees and natural resources. It also entails paying attention to our community and social component, or that aspect, and the administrative or management component. And we have to take them all as one. And when we make interventions on one of those components, it reverberates throughout the system. So it's pretty nuanced ultimately. Our team's mission is really to maximize the social, economic, and environmental benefits of our urban forest, and to minimize its costs and liabilities by means of adaptive management and community engagement. And not to keep driving home the point, but it's not enough to just care for our trees when working on our urban forest. We have to engage people. We can't just expect our urban forest to develop and get better if we're not engaging people and if we're not staying receptive to changing conditions. So that's where the adaptive management component comes in to play. Our vision is really to have a holistically planned and managed or holistically planned and sustainably managed network of trees and related infrastructure that really supports the well-being of all people and our planet now as well as into the future. Thinking several generations ahead, as I suspect you all know, where we've really fallen short as a society relative to the people who occupied this landscape before us was making those long-term decisions. Currently, we're lucky to have a 10 to 20-year planning horizon, and we need to start thinking about 100+ year planning horizons. So we're currently kicking a lot of the true costs of everything we do when we build or develop or make planning decisions. We, over the last 100 years, for sure, have not considered the true costs of, and we're seeing it now with regard to climate change. So we take that very seriously, and we're trying to plan holistically and manage holistically. So as mentioned earlier, our urban forestry team's focus is really on street trees and right-of-way trees. So I promise to call that out and clearly define. Here's one of my favorite areas of town. It's the corner of 11th and Patterson. I guess that's the Downtown Neighborhood Association. And here we have two very iconic large trees. The tree on the right is located between the sidewalk and the curb, and that's a street tree by virtue of its placement and where it's growing. In contrast, although it appears and performs the same function as the tree on the right, this Doug fir to the left is situated behind the sidewalk and is located on private property. So here we have a street tree by definition, and the tree on the left is a private property tree. So in general, all areas of the city that are adjacent to streets have a dedicated right-of-way, which usually corresponds to the back edge of the sidewalk. There are some subtle differences in areas, and sometimes you might have a few feet beyond the sidewalk that is public property. So those trees are considered street trees, and the City of Eugene's Urban Forestry Work Group is responsible for their maintenance. In contrast, the trees on private property and trees that are not street trees are the maintenance and management responsibility of the adjacent property owner. And there are some cases where there may not be a sidewalk in place. So we have a database that's accessible to all. It's a public street tree inventory, and it's an easy way to figure out. You can enter your address, access that via the web, and look to see where those property lines are. And sometimes it's not easy to tell, but I will say, if you ever have a question or a concern, our team is happy to help. So give us a call, reach out to us, and we can help determine whether your trees are on public property or private property, or if you want to plant a tree, you can figure out whether the area you're looking at is on private property or public property. Anything to add, Erik?
No,
Okay, I'll keep rolling then. Feel free to interrupt me or interject when you need to. So, as mentioned, and in our mission statement, we recognize that trees are not entirely all good. They have serious draw sides in many cases, whether that's liability or maintenance responsibility, and they definitely involve costs that it's easy to glance over or to gloss over. People love trees, but we have to be clear-eyed about the fact that they're not all pie in the sky or greatness. There are some some downsides to trees. We call those ecosystem disservices. Trees provide many benefits and provide many ecosystem services, but we would not be honest if we didn't say there are costs. And part of the reason, or part of the problem that we faced in the past, is people say, yeah, let's plant more trees, but we never have dedicated budgets to maintain them. I think it was Kurt Vonnegut who said, everyone wants to build, but no one wants to maintain. So when we plan for our streetscapes, it's essential to keep in mind that there are going to be some maintenance needs and some costs required to do it well. So I just like to point that out. I know many tree folks are just about the upsides, and we gloss over the downsides. So let's be honest that it's a little bit of both, but ultimately the net benefits of trees and street trees far outweighs the costs and the liabilities. So that's why we advocate for investing more in trees. The current rate that I'm familiar with here in the Willamette Valley is a return on investment of about 3.5 to 1 for trees. So every dollar we invest in trees, we get about $3.50 of benefits coming back to us as a community. As mentioned earlier, in terms of acreage within our urban forest, about 39% of our, let's see, yeah, 39% of our city's tree canopy is on public property, and that includes our park trees. So all the rest that you see in purple here are on private property, and it's important to keep that in mind for a number of reasons. Whoop, sorry, I was trying to get that bar out of my way, and looks like, did that change the view for you all? Or can you still see the full screen, the presenter view?
Yeah, we see presenter view, Scott.
Presenter view, okay, great. And the current slide is on current canopy cover and fan. Is that correct?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you, Todd. Really appreciate that feedback. You know how it is, flying blind sometimes. So jumping to this slide, this is a snapshot from a new tool that our department procured, and Ian will go into detail with this new tool. I'm so excited. For the first time ever, it's allowed us to dive into the details and get pretty granular with regard to, so actually this jumped ahead for some reason. Gonna go back, work with me slow here. Okay, sorry about that. Here's where we were. So the vast majority of our trees within our urban forest are on private property. However, as mentioned before, our team doesn't have authority over those trees. We realize to manage the system holistically, we have to consider those trees and influence them as much as possible. And that's why I'm here tonight speaking with you as both a neighborhood association as private property owners, to try and inspire you to think about and advocate for private tree planning and regulation. But the fact is our work group, Urban Forestry, only has direct authority over our street trees. So that's what we're going to try and do a stellar job managing and planning and planting, and then lead by example, and hopefully one day reach a point where once we've got our own system of trees dialed in or close to being dialed in, we can then start tightening up things on private property. But we've got to start somewhere. So our plan is to really focus on doing the best by way of our street trees as possible. And as mentioned earlier, we want to get ahead of problems before they become problems. So we've really tried to adopt a proactive approach and a planning-based approach. A lot of folks think that it's viable to just let trees do their thing and deal with them if they have problems. That is neither cost effective, nor is it conducive to producing trees which are big and long-lived. And those big long-lived trees are where we really get the vast majority of our benefits. smaller trees are nice and essential, but they're not our ecosystem workhorses, and they're not providing the same return on investment that our older, bigger trees provide. So we're really trying, one of our main goals is to produce trees that are long-lived, low maintenance, and provide a tremendous number of ecosystem services. Here's an interesting photo taken in the 1930s when our city was much younger and less developed and had far fewer people. And as you can see, there were not that many trees. This is looking over the U of O. The street in the foreground is Franklin Boulevard, and looking south towards Spencer Butte, the little cluster of trees here, if you can see my cursor, is the Masonic Cemetery, I believe. Yes, and this is the Pioneer Cemetery close to the U of O. This is the Mac Court, and this is Hayward Field. So what you see here are not that many trees, and you see a lot of pervious surface, good intact soils that can absorb rainfall and sequester carbon and do what soils do. In contrast, this is the same viewpoint, more or less, taken in 2011, I believe, and you see a whole lot more trees, but a whole lot more impervious surfaces by way of buildings and sidewalks and roadways. So as this says here, our current canopy cover is 22%, which is a lot more than it was in the early 1900s, but that's not telling the full story. Although we have a lot more trees, we have a lot more impervious surface, and it's really important to factor in the ratio of tree canopy cover to impervious surface to really dial into how we're doing overall. Over the last decade, we've been able to pin down, thanks to the tool that I'm going to describe and Ian's going to demonstrate in more detail, the fact that we've lost citywide 1% of canopy cover over the last 10 years. And what this equates to is 32.5 Hayward Field stadia or stadiums lost in terms of tree canopy cover. Imagine that. That is an 8-acre site, and it helps you conceptualize how much tree canopy cover we've lost. Some neighborhoods within Eugene have actually gained canopy cover, but that's not the case in the Friendly Area Neighbors Association. As you can see here, our current canopy cover for the entirety is 20%, and that includes private property as well as public property. And then our tree canopy cover over our roadways is 18%. And in both those scales, we've lost 2%. So what that means is you've actually lost more canopy cover as a percentage than the overall city, and that's concerning. To my understanding and to my knowledge, there's been a fair amount, arguably average or above average development within your neighborhood, but I would suspect, based on what I know, that probably pertains to a lot of storm damage in the area. So just wanted to give you an update that the situation, we're trying to get to 30%. Our goal, as I'll talk in the next slide, citywide, we'd like to see 30% canopy cover average. And I would think that the Friendly Area neighborhood could support even far greater than that as a percentage. So let's keep that in mind as we work together to plant trees and to retain trees and preserve trees and try and withstand development pressure. I'd like to give you a quick overview of some of our recent projects that our work group has undertaken and in an effort to better our urban forest and our street tree population. One of the things we're very happy with is our approved street tree species list and planting guide that was published last year. And it is a great guide and resource for helping folks to understand what species of tree will have a high likelihood of succeeding in the face of pressure from climate change, and which trees are known performers, low maintenance, and will behave well in the extremely challenging planting strip that most trees go into. As mentioned, our tree plotter canopy tool was recently procured this summer, and it's going to revolutionize and really help us dial in and refine how we plan and plant out our city. So Ian will go into more detail there. As you can see, tree canopy change citywide over the last decade was just under 1%. So current canopy cover is 22.1%, but our goal over the next decade is to get to 30% citywide. You folks likely heard about our recent canopy campaign to plant giant sequoias in advance of the World Track and Field event, originally scheduled for 2021, postponed till to next summer. And it was kind of a campaign to make people think about carbon footprints and impacts and offsets that urban forestry efforts can provide. So we tried to get people to think about, yes, isn't it great? We're going to be hosting the world for in 2021, now 2022, as part of that track and field event. But what is the carbon footprint of hosting an event like that, making improvements to our infrastructure? So we were just trying to get people to think in everything that they do, that we do, what is the carbon footprint associated with that, and how can we make meaningful offsets? Another project was making refinements to our green infrastructure system. You've probably seen a lot of these stormwater facilities going in around town, and I'm saddened to report that although they're great for dealing with storm surge, excess rainfall that can come during high rainfall events, the fact of the matter is they're displacing a lot of our valuable street tree planting sites. And although these engineered stormwater facilities have many benefits, I would say that their return on investment and their ecosystem service provision is far less than a traditional street tree. And nobody's talking about that fact. We're saying, oh, aren't these great? We're doing green activities and green building projects. But when you look at the carbon footprint associated with building these and the true contributions to water quality and the maintenance needs, which are not being addressed, we've got a growing inventory of these street tree or of these stormwater facilities that are displacing street trees and then requiring, we don't have a budget in place to maintain them. They collect trash, they require plant maintenance, and yes, they provide benefits, but I would contend that they don't provide the same benefits and co-benefits that street trees provide. So I would love, if any of you are interested in talking more about this, to get a groundswell of grassroots support. And I would ask you to put some pressure on our decision makers, our transportation folks, our engineers, and ask some of the hard questions. What's going on and what are the long-term impacts and true costs associated with these projects? But we have made great inroads. We're working more closely. We have a climate action associate who's a engineer, and she is fantastic. We're working closely. She's working to identify areas where we do capital projects and quantify what the impacts are and find meaningful ways to offset that. So I am very gladdened and inspired by that fact. We've recently worked with, received a pro bono assessment. Ian was part of the Cambium Carbon team that did a general assessment to look at what waste loops we have or waste we have going on pertaining to urban wood. We remove a lot of trees that could be milled and turned into higher value products that are simply turned into chips. We'd like to see, ideally, wherever urban wood products can be produced and turned into milled products or structural products or high value products, which would include biochar, and I'm glad to see Todd Miller, who is not only a fan resident, but one of the champions of our community in terms of sustainability. I, on a daily basis, laud his efforts with the Metropolitan Wastewater Commission to undertake truly sustainable projects. His BioCycle farm is just a shining national example, and we've been in a lot of discussions to look at ways that we can turn his poplar farm into high-value products and biochar that can return revenue that can be used for reforestation and sustainability projects, and really create a full cycle system. And that is the essence of sustainability. So we're really becoming more involved with that. I'm working on a revision to our urban forestry management plan, which is embarrassingly outdated. It's 30 years old, and we're going to publish that before the end of the year. Ideally, if I can get my act together and if forces don't conspire against me, but definitely some of you may have seen the solicitation for feedback for that process, the first step of the planning process. Very excited about that. We are finally in a place where we've dialed in our street tree maintenance cycle to get to approach 10 years. And that's what best management practices advocate for. If you're not touching your trees on close to a 10-year cycle, there's too much deferred maintenance, and you're not as efficient as you can be financially, and you're not getting the return on investment in terms of ecosystem services from your trees that you could ensure. We'd love in the future to explore ways food security is a very important part of neighborhood and community resilience. And we recognize, although a lot of folks on private property are doing a lot to grow food, I'm not happy with the extent to which we're using public resources to ensure community-based local food security. We have a lot of opportunities for community orchards. That's not to say that I'm a huge fan of growing fruit trees street side. People always say, why don't we just plant fruit trees next to between the sidewalk and the street? And the reason for that is pretty simple. It creates a lot of litter and maintenance nightmares for folks and just doesn't have the return on investment. The vast majority of trees in those situations go underutilized or unutilized. And I think it's important, just like so many things, to have thoughtful planning and structure. This is a site off of Coburg Road in North Eugene. It's a community orchard. These are apple trees of the right size that can be easily maintained or gleaners can utilize. And we just need to be thoughtful about how we do that. So I'm excited to work with folks to figure out how we can do that at a neighborhood level and not create a maintenance nightmare, but create true food security and get folks to collaborate at a neighborhood level, doing meaningful work, and much like we have a community garden program through the city of Eugene. And last but not least, a future project that I'm really excited about that Todd Miller is going to be involved with is using tertiary wastewater to that's being recycled for use for watering our trees. As things dry out, as we get hotter climate conditions, it just does not make sense to use our pristine McKinsey River water to water trees that should be really reserved for sustaining salmonids in our river and for sustaining people at the highest level. There's no reason that we can't use tertiary wastewater to water our landscapes. It's safe and a great resource. We just need to develop our infrastructure. So Todd's been instrumental in that effort, and we are looking forward to being active partners. We'll start with street trees and hopefully be able to move into watering park trees and areas where it makes sense. So limiting factors in urban forestry. I talked about the complex social ecological system, and really each of these three components of our urban forest have their own barriers. So we're looking to explore how we can bolster regulations and dial in requirements so that we're not losing trees. So that would be tree preservation standards and standard specifications for landscaping around new development and in the street environment. Really trying to find ways that we can incentivize folks to retain trees, maintain their trees, and certainly some disincentives. Make it not as cost effective to do the right thing, to make it more costly to remove a tree than to preserve a tree. So finding that balance and refining our policies and procedures and really getting adequate budget in place to do right. Then in the social and community realm, bolstering public awareness, so education and engagement and outreach, much as we're doing tonight, and looking to avoid the downsides of greening, and that usually that's known to result in gentrification and displacement. So we've seen across the country and throughout the world, there are strategic investments made to make a neighborhood nicer. And right now, I think it's fair to say that we're seeing that intensely in the various neighborhoods, probably in the friendly area neighbors. As property values rise, working families are no longer able to afford and own their own homes. So we want to be very thoughtful. And there's no way that we in urban forestry can address that, but we can work with partners in the planning department and at the community level to be thoughtful and mindful, to recognize that it's a real possibility, and then to get some housing policy measures in place so that we guard against that. And then lastly, we have the more traditional natural resource or tree-related barriers and problems, issues that we can deal with. Spatial constraints, so planning when we build new streetscapes to make sure that we have a minimum of 6 to 8 feet of space so that we can grow trees that aren't going to, after 3 years, buckle the sidewalks. And we can make sure that people know and that we're only planting trees that are known performers, that won't be like sweet gums that we see that you plant them in soils and they so quickly cause sidewalk conflicts and so forth and so on. So those are the 3 realms. And then lastly, I'm a big fan of what is known as the collective impact framework. I believe that when we're dealing with wicked problems, as we discussed earlier, those protracted, really complex problems, one sector, the governmental sector or the nonprofit sector or the private sector or commercial sector, is not able to address them single-handedly. It's only when we link arms and really work together that we're going to make headway. And in order for that to be effective, we have to have a common agenda. That is a common understanding of what the problems are and a common vision or shared vision for change. We need to be measuring and monitoring using the same metrics. So if we have different ideas of what success entails or what progress or lack of progress entails, we're never going to make headway. We're going to have the classic Tower of Babel or situation. So we really need to collect standardized data and measure our results and agree on what those metrics are and focus on continuous improvement in performance management. Lastly, we need to we need to be sure to have complementary or mutually reinforcing activities. If we're duplicating efforts or working at cross purposes, that's going to be problematic. So we need to differentiate our approaches and really have coordination. We also need to have strong networks of communication, and that's where I'm so grateful to have a strong neighborhood leadership council and strong pre-existing networks of communication and outreach as we see with our various neighborhood groups. And then lastly, backbone support. And the city of Eugene does a good job, and our neighborhood councils do a great job of providing that backbone support, coordinating all these various efforts. So I'll leave you with that. And how can friendly area neighbors support urban forestry's efforts? As mentioned earlier, I'd ask you to keep putting pressure on our organization and agency. Keep asking the tough and important questions. Let us know what's important to you and hold us accountable. Ask us what is our status quo and what do we need to do to move from where we are to where we want to be? Do things need to be adjusted? So we've mentioned some goals, but we've got moving targets. Things are shifting quickly. So are we still on track? Are we staying flexible? And then lastly, where are our vulnerabilities? Where do we really need to focus our efforts? As Ian will talk about, I'm sure, defensible space issues are very important. As Erik Burke will talk about, where do we lack tree canopy cover, and where can we target our tree planting efforts to get the most bang for our buck and really start addressing environmental justice issues, because it's not just about where we're low on canopy. We have to make sure to plant trees in areas that it's going to have meaningful impacts for people who are historically disadvantaged or vulnerable populations. And then help promote and participate in the development and use of our tools and our metrics and our tracking systems so that we can really bolster well-being and sustainability. So help participate in the vision and action plan process, explore the tree plotter canopy tool, work with Friends of Trees to bolster tree planting efforts, both street side, but also on private property wherever possible. And then my question to you is, I'd love to hear how we in urban forestry and with our parks and open space can help you achieve your goals. It sounds like we're in large part on the same page, but I don't want to assume that, and I'd love to hear from you. And really, what are your concerns regarding our urban forest? I just had to throw this slide in. It's makes me feel good. This is on Friendly Street. I believe it's the 2400 block, a new development or a new house that went in. This is a large street tree that if we didn't get creative, would have and should have been removed. And thanks to partnership with the new property owner, with our planning department and our department, we were able to go the extra mile and deviate the sidewalk and think outside the box to retain this majestic street tree and still have a usable sidewalk and address everyone's needs. It's not an ideal situation. We know this species of tree is going to continue growing, but it gave me hope that we thought and worked outside the box, and we were receptive, and that it just makes me feel good. So let's figure out ways that we can creatively problem solve with other problems and issues and do the same thing. So sorry to ramble at length. I'd love to hear what Erik and Ian have to add and what your concerns are.
All right. Thanks, Scotty.
My pleasure.
Ian is, I'm going to go next, and then Ian after me. And I love Friendly Neighborhood, and I went to Adams School in first grade 50 years ago, way back in the dark ages. And one of my favorite, I lived at 24th and Friendly. And when I was a little kid, one of my favorite things to do was to ride my big wheel down between 23rd and 24th, down that big hill, come flying down there. It was a lot of fun. And that was a really nice article, I wanted to say, in the newsletter on trees, really nicely written. So great work on that. One thing that really stands out about Friendly Neighborhood to me as a challenge is the soil. In Friendly Neighborhood, a lot of it, particularly the flat on the north end, but anywhere on the flat side, not on the hills, is built on wetlands. And most trees and plants will not thrive there. So it's really important to be thoughtful about what we plant. And you know, the soil is heavy clay with a really high water table pretty close to the surface. And so that presents a lot of challenges for trees to get oxygen. It also presents challenges for trees being in conflict with hardscape. And there's some traditions in arboriculture that Scotty talks about a lot, and arborists up in Portland do public education about. And one simple thing that can be done, I just want to mention this right off the bat, to help with conflict with hardscape, is to take a flat blade shovel, and in the fall, like right around now, when the soil becomes moist again and turns, you know, the wetlands turn to concrete in the summer, and you can't even get a shovel in if they're not irrigated in many locations. But this time of year, you can take that flat blade shovel and run it vertically along maybe 5 feet on either side of a tree. Correct me if I'm wrong, Scotty, and both on the sidewalk side and the curb side, and just run it the length of the shovel blade along there, and that can really help head off hardscape damage. So something to think about. I wanted to briefly say what Friends of Trees does, and so we basically engage volunteers to plant and care for trees, and we plant trees in our green space program, which is very small here in Eugene, very large in our Portland chapter. But so our first planting of the year is going to be November 6th out on Northwest Expressway, between the expressway and the rail yard. And we've been planting, this will be our phase 9, our 9th planting in that stretch. And that's what we call our green space planting. So it's in an undeveloped area that isn't right along a house or in a yard. Our main planting program is our neighborhood trees program, where we plant street and yard trees. And we also have a volunteer pruning program. We do tree watering of many of the trees we plant. Our main focus is getting the recipient or the adjoining resident to water the trees, and for us to support them through email watering reminders, tree care guides, postcards, and volunteers called summer inspectors who go and check every tree twice each of the first 2 dry seasons and help educate the tree recipient about how to care for trees. Today I got a email from one of the a voice message from one of the excellent local arborists saying that we had planted 2 trees too deep, and we need to do better education with our volunteers. And I appreciate that, because that's something we really try to do. And we just can't always get it right with volunteers. But and then I went and did a couple inspections where I saw trees planted too deep, and that's particularly challenging in friendly neighborhood on the flat. So that's an important thing to look for. We also have work parties where we weed and mulch trees. And then we had about 15 tree walks in the last year, a couple in Springfield, and then many in Eugene. And so that's what we do. And then I looked at what we've done in the last few years in FAN, and in 1920 was one of our biggest years in friendly neighborhood, because every year on Martin Luther King Day, we partner with City of Eugene, and City of Eugene volunteers plant in a park where we meet. And it was the biggest planting Friends of Trees has ever participated in the Eugene area that year at Westmoreland Park. I forget how many volunteers. I think it was around 140 volunteers. It was just a massive event. The city did a whole bunch of plantings in the park, which built on the Frisbee Golf Course series of plantings there in the past, which are just wonderful to walk through. And we planted 64 trees in friendly neighborhood as street and yard trees, many on MLK Day, but others throughout the season. Last year, we planted 27 trees in friendly. And then of those trees, let's see, Oh, and this year we have 25 people have signed up to potentially get trees from us so far this season, and our season begins November 6th, so we're still starting, and five trees have been ordered to be planted already. So we're off to a really good start for this season. Friends of Trees works in the city limits of Springfield and Eugene. I'm hoping that Ian in his presentation will cover use the map to show equity for friendly neighborhood, if that's possible.
Yeah.
Oh, great. And so I want to mention some things that are upcoming. So the way we organize our plantings is we break into teams of about 6 to 8 volunteers. They're all Saturday mornings, usually from 9 to noon. And the 6 to 8 volunteers head out through the neighborhood, either on foot. This year, we're trying to increase equity and sustainability in our model, which I'll talk about in a minute. But we've been building bike teams for years. And so last year, we averaged 2 out of our 8 teams at our events were bike teams, the most we've ever pulled off. This year, we're hoping to increase that and add walking teams also. But most of our teams carpool throughout the neighborhood with a volunteer who has a pickup, and we put all the trees, shovels, tools, stakes for the team into the truck and carpool around. And yes, private individuals, we plant the trees. We do not give trees to people, but you can order street or private yard trees from Friends of Trees. I saw a comment in the chat there. And volunteers will come and plant them, and we encourage everyone, if they can, to volunteer with us, ideally being on the team that plants their own trees. I'm not a big fan of tree giveaways, but I was very impressed with how well the city did theirs. So much better than Arbor Day Foundation or some of the other groups where we see their trees dying around town. And we're going to try and learn from the city's excellent work and offer a lot of educational materials. And we have a grant this year to do our first tree giveaway. And that's coming up on December 18th. We'll be giving away at least 250 different fruit trees, native trees, and shade trees. November 6th is our first planting of the year in Northwest Expressway. November 20th is our first street and yard tree planting. And then December 4th is our first street and yard tree planting in December. So those are the planting and upcoming events we have through the rest of the year. Really about every 2 weeks from November through April, we have a planting event, and any volunteer is welcome to join us. Since COVID, we've changed the way we do things so that unfortunately last year carpooling went out, which was a huge blow to our sustainability and equity, in that it excluded poor people who don't have cars, and which I was really bummed about. But this year we're bringing it back. We actually require you to be vaccinated to attend our events now. We don't enforce that or ask anybody that, but it is our policy following state guidelines. And we mask up and are back to carpooling. But we're also trying to increase bike riding. If you're interested in participating, go to friendsoftrees.org, find your way to the Eugene calendar page. All our events for the planting season are up there, and the online sign-up forms are there. We now cap events. And so a lot of the events are so popular, they fill up already. All our pruning events filled up in the first week of that they were open. I want to talk about a few, let's see, one thing that we're focusing on this year to build the equity and sustainability component is to try and consolidate our work in underserved areas. And the way, what we're focusing on this year with particular support from an EWEB Green Power grant is to focus on 2 roughly 8 square block areas of Bethel neighborhood immediately west of Highway 99. And in those, we've had, over the summer, we got started on the project. And so we picked a community park in each neighborhood, Mangan Park in the north and Gilbert Park in the south. and we had a tree walk event in each of those parks to kick it off, and then another event where neighbors from that neighborhood, not Friends of Trees, not city, but neighbors themselves went door to door to every house with a blank space in the front right of way or the front yard and left a door hanger offering trees. This year, because of our support from eWeb, we're able to offer discounted or free trees to everyone in those areas for street and yard trees for the first time, because we get no support from municipalities for our yard tree programs in Eugene and Springfield. We do in all the cities we work in the Portland area. And so we're very excited to have this funding to allow, we typically have a tree fee. It's about a sixth of our real cost of, so it's $50 for a street tree and $85 for a yard tree. And that anyone can ask, no questions asked, for 50 or 100% off and get a free or half off tree from that already discounted tree fee. I know that we're going to run out of time soon, so I'm going to try and wrap things up with some things to do. I'm super inspired this year by the beautiful fall color. Maybe it's like this every year, but it seems like an especially good year for fall color. I've just been really enjoying it. I've been doing some virtual tree walks, and in the one I did on Tuesday, I just sat over piles of leaves on the ground with the camera and just picked through them and identified trees. And it was just so beautiful that walking around town now. We even, Taylor in our office took photos of Oregon white oak leaves in the bright sunshine today. And we're really trying to turn the kind of tradition of how we perceive trees in the city around a little bit from a consumer-based approach where that's really based on, I don't know how to say this, that's really an aesthetic approach where all we really look at is how a tree looks, but not its functions about how is this helping larvae? How is this helping all kinds of invertebrates and birds and all the wildlife that's in our city? How is it doing all the ecological services? And I would argue that the trees that do that functional work are more beautiful than the ones that have 2 weeks of brilliant color and they're brought in from somewhere else and they really don't look like they fit here once you really focus on getting to know our climate and our soils and our forests. And so we're trying to turn that around, and one way is just showing how beautiful Oregon white oak is usually considered to have brown, ugly fall color and to look ratty and scraggly. And I personally think they're beautiful. And today we took colored photographs that showed how beautiful their leaves are, ranging from chartreuse and really rich green with the light on them and with brown with hints of red. And I think we need to appreciate brown more. But I have Oregon ash is one of our classic city trees. And I have one that I look at out my window. It's the tree that thrives in our wetlands. And it is just stunning golden and orange right now. I just love it. But some of the things, thinking about leaves, there's a lot we can do. And right now we have this model. Eugene does better than most cities in that we actually use a huge amount of our leaves or compost them and have this great redistributive program where we get them back to gardens. But ideally, leaves, I'm part of, I totally support the movement that's called Leave Leaves Alone. And there's a wonderful website, leaveleavesalone.org, and its associated website, healthylawns.org. And really, leaves don't ever need to leave a site. They should not leave anyone's site. And we can find ways to help each other. Elderly people who aren't able to deal with their leaves, we should be helping each other and our neighbors and forming groups that go and help people deal with their leaves and process them on site, either by thatching them, mowing them into the lawn, composting them, or ideally simply leaving them where they fall off the paved surfaces on all the permeable parts of our site. And there's a great checklist of 10 things on the Healthy Lawns site But some of the things we can do is just really mow high, water less. One of the big things I would recommend doing if you have lawn irrigation is remove it and enjoy the beautiful golden lawn. In the past, we talk about a brown dead lawn. Just reframe it as a golden lawn when it dies back in the summer. It's beautiful and golden. It's not ugly. And a golden lawn like that, there's a movement that came out of the Yale School of Forestry called the Freedom Lawn. And in that movement, you don't do anything except mow with a push mower or an electric mower, set high and infrequently, and it totally changes the ecology of the lawn. And people have no idea how many larvae and insects, butterflies are dependent on leaves that fall. It's really, if you look up, you can see free fertilizer raining from the sky. And most, in my experience, going door to door to thousands of houses around Eugene and Springfield, including most houses that have blank places in friendly neighborhood, I have personally gone to and knocked on the door at least. And I would say the majority of people express negative things about trees, primarily leaves, sidewalk conflicts, and maintenance concerns. And so we need to find ways to turn that around that are positive and show us doing work together to address that, helping each other deal with some of those problems. But also, as Scott said, I think it's really important to acknowledge that trees have pros and cons, and every kind of tree has downsides, just like myself, and all the rest of us have upsides and downsides, and trees are like that too. But as Scott pointed out, trees have a 2.5 ROI, and you get way more upside than downside. And really, I think we need a more holistic way of looking at things where we can hold two things at once, good and bad, and weigh them all, and kind of break away from our dichotomous approach where there's just everything is either all good or all bad. And I really hope we can do that. One of the main things that we can do is try and avoid adding impervious surfaces like a giant extra area to park an RV or whatever it is, and to try and, wherever we can, actually remove pavement, asphalt, and concrete. We have way too much pavement and hardscape in our cities. I advocate removing one of our two sidewalks on our streets. And almost no one walks on our streets. It's really sad that we've come to be so car dominated. And one sidewalk is perfectly adequate and takes care of everybody, even elderly and ultra-abled people. And we need to shrink the size of our streets also. If we want, this is only if we want to have a healthy world that we live in. And I hope we do. I believe we do. But that's the direction that I really think we need to move in. Other stuff we can do is really think about the habitat consequences of what we plant. And, as Scott mentioned, friendly neighborhood is #1 in Eugene, I would say, followed by Whitaker in planting fruit trees in violation of city rules in the public right-of-way. And I just rode my bike through Friendly the other day and saw 40 recent illegal plantings in the right-of-way of fruit trees. And I love fruit trees. I think I've been outside the city the leading advocate for adding fruit trees to the approved street tree list for large planting strips under power lines. That's where they're not in conflict with large canopy trees. And if you have a wide planting strip, then you avoid the 3 big issues of planting fruit trees in the public right-of-way: large fruit drop yellow jackets lawsuit, large fruit drop trip lawsuit, and then the fact that most fruit trees are abandoned and create maintenance issues. There is a huge amount of fruit trees we have that we're not gleaning from. Friendly neighborhood is doing the best gleaning of any neighborhood in Eugene, and we need to build on that. And I was so pleased to see Scott give such a great example of fruit tree pruning at the Coburg Road site. That's where I took my fruit tree pruning class with the brilliant Ross Penhaligon, the extension agent. And there's so many places where we could be doing this all around our neighborhoods, planting clusters of fruit trees and food forests that can give us so much fruit. On Saturday, I'm going to Mapleton to collect chestnut trees from a chestnut farm that we're hoping to spread around Eugene to large yards. Friendly Neighborhood has some of these yards that could take these trees. That you need a lot of room, and also River Road Neighborhood. And so we're working with River Road Neighborhood on doing this. We need more food trees in our city, but we need to do it really thoughtfully, so we're not creating more work, especially for the city tree crew that has a few staff for almost 100,000 trees. And so I really hope we can all work together and imagine the most beautiful urban forest we can, and find ways to take kind of baby steps towards that. Thank you so much. And Ian, take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. Huge shout out to Scott and Erik. They are both people that I absolutely admire and are just brilliant. Here's the thing that all of you might not know about them. This is the kind of stuff they do for fun. This is the stuff they do when they're bored. This is what they do for everything in life. They are so committed and absolutely love trees, the care of them, and the things that go into them. But more so, they're in positions and have credentials where they could work in a lot of different places. And they have had longtime positions of where they are and have become leaders in our community in different ways of making the concept of trees accessible. So, you know, for some people, they might get really excited about the nuts and bolts of which tree, why here, these things. I think for the average person, that might be missed on. And being able to have a tether from someone that's actively working and sacrificing a lot of time and putting a lot of really thoughtful effort into their messaging and how they can have the opportunity to maybe impact one person's life, to have them advocate for an outdoors that they can think fondly of instead of just existing in. That's really something that is really hard to find. And it's really even more difficult to take advantage of people that are putting in this kind of energy and match it with the energy that we have as day-to-day people. How much time do we have for another project? I just got married this summer to my wife. We've been together for 7 years. And they're, you know, it's just now that I'm thinking about these things and we're moving into a new home, the idea of a new project these days seems like really a quick ticket to my grave. So how can we create application for these ideas and these concepts of things that we like? Right? I think if anyone's here attending, I think I counted almost 30 of you that are here. Thank you so much for hanging in with us. We all look forward for the opportunity to talk about this stuff and geek out about it because we absolutely love it. So we really appreciate your time and spending it with us. And so for me, I will share my screen. I started out as a chemistry major and James Madison University in Virginia. I am originally from New Jersey, and I moved to Oregon because it is the opposite of New Jersey. And I plan on staying here. I love it. And I think my educational background was in the hard sciences. I wanted to learn how to be the best at a really specific thing. And I kind of had this moment where when I moved to Oregon, I was finishing up college at U of O, and I had one too many labs that was in a all gray basement, and I kind of snapped. And I said, I can't do this anymore. I'm tired of being locked up, and I'm tired of everyone being so specialized to the point that they can't communicate with how to make the things that they're so passionate about happen. And so I went to a freshman advisor, pretended I was a freshman and thought I had no idea about what I wanted to do. Just want to start all over, and we kind of connected some classes about urban farming and sustainable cityscapes and landscape architect. And all of these different kinds of ideas, and it happened to be something that they called environmental studies. What I like to call it is a environmentally focused science translator. I like to be the person that helps really take the specialist's passion, dedication, and research and help connect it to people in neighborhoods, communities, and local governments, and to find opportunities for us to get where we want to go without making too much more work for ourselves. You know, some of us might have the assets, but we don't know where to put it. Some of us might have the ideas, but we don't know where to put it. Or some of us might just be bored and want to do something that's more fulfilling. Being able to have community members that can have a rich history of showing quality and thoughtful work it is so important. And connecting and identifying those things and giving all of you the opportunity to know they exist. So if that day does come around, whether it's today, tomorrow, or in 5 years, where you think, you know what, I kind of wanted a tree in my front yard, but the one that's out there is not looking too great. What do I do? You know, there's a chance that you're going to remember, oh, you know what? There was this presentation, I should call the city, and I know that they have a partnership with Friends of Trees. Maybe they can help me plant something better that can get me excited about looking at my yard. And so this concept is where I came in with ECO-System Solutions. I do project management and consulting for pretty much anything that revolves around community development. There are four core principles that I really challenge my clients to examine and put themselves under the magnifying glass of things are crazy right now. I mean, with the fact that we have 30 people of varying ages that all know how to get on a Zoom meeting, connect, knowing they can't be in person, and kind of share ideas, there's no other event that I can think of that would have brought us all here. And there's so many exceptions and weird things. Modern day success and what modern day health is like is totally different than what we thought it was. And so my philosophy that I really challenge myself to work with my clients with is to look at, all right, what if we have 4 equal parts of what success might make up? What if we look at social health, environmental health, financial health, and personal wellness? And if we can look at those all as 25% portions into our decisions, we're going to realize some things are a lot more difficult and some things are a lot more simple. And there's no better example of looking at these 4 core principles than trees. And my background is not in trees. My interest and passion in trees came from Scott and Erik. So there is a climate action plan 2.0 that was published by the city recently. And it has a lot of things that are, you know, this is page 115 of 447. And it looks like we have a couple of stars, a half moon, and a circle. That's great. I don't know what that means. They might say good, great, but how do I quantify that? My background's in science. I want to know, I want to be able to prove it. I like trees, but why should they stay? Why should we advocate for them? And that's how, when I was introduced to Scott, the city uses a mapping program that allows us to look at all of the public trees that are in what they call the right-of-way. So essentially, not your private property. And for each one, there is a dot that they have. Let me use this one instead. That represents a tree. And I helped the city and complete this project of their inventory of every neighborhood. And there are entries that are from their staff. There are entries from the staff that I had in my project. There are a bunch of entries from people from Friends of Trees from when they do it. And this integration of data is so important. It gives us an actual idea of what's out there. So that when we say, hey, we think that we have canopy issues, okay, prove it. We can until we have something like this. And so we can look at individual trees and they can tie work orders to them. They can share the history of when it was planted, when it was removed, when anything. So when you call the city and say, hey, this tree outside my house on 18th, this is what they're going to look at. And if you know that when you call them, you're going to be able to have such a more productive conversation with the person on the phone. And it's really difficult to know what you're asking for. Like when you're saying, I have a problem, are you going to pay for it? Am I going to pay for it? Who's liable? It's a difficult situation. But there are mechanisms in place that can help both their staff and you know right away. And if you need to know if there's next steps that need to happen. And having an inventory like this for the city is useful so that they know how to do their pruning plans, how they can adjust their goals. But it's estimated that only 33% of the city's canopy is public. The other 66 is on our property, private, and they can't manage it. So what do we look at? Why do we care? What does all this mean? So when we did the inventory, I did a report specifically on friendly neighborhood. It is the only one I did a full-fledged report on for this. And that's because it has a lot of character. It's a really good example of what we hope a lot of neighborhoods can see and be incentivized to do. I think something that's really difficult that both Scott and Erik emphasized is the interactions the average person has with the tree is usually don't notice it or it's causing a problem. And when those are your only two interactions, your knowledge and your connectivity to those things are absent. They happen to be there. You don't understand why they're there or the significance. But as I was looking at these, I think they have 80,000 public right-of-way trees that we inventoried. I thought, why is this important? How can we prove it? What can we do with this information? The numbers started spinning. And so we broke down the types of trees and kind of advocated for, by having an inventory, we can anticipate growths that maybe we need to reduce that are invasive, or maybe ones that are going to have diseases coming their way in the future that we can proactively plan for. That's something you never, unfortunately, get to hear people in Scott or Erik's position get to talk about, being proactive, because it's really difficult to find the value on a level that's understandable to multiple people. And for it to be resourced and valued appropriately. And that's where I found a passion for trees, finding their value in ways that we aren't thinking about. So for friendly specifically, the annual benefits, and I think I did this in 2016, was almost $300,000 in just benefits. But then the appraisal value of the trees was almost $10 million just for friendly. And when you start adding up all of these little things, you start realizing that past the environmental benefits, there are factors that go further into our human interactions. On here to the right, we're going to see different times of day, 6 a.m., 3 p.m., 7 p.m. Where it is darkest and reddest is where it's hottest. And we know there that those are the busiest streets. And they also mean that they have the lowest canopy. What does that mean in a more practical sense? If we look at the census data and we correlate where there is hotter concentrations of heat coming off the asphalt of roads and less canopy, we have more vulnerable social status of residents there. We also have lower property values. And one thing that's so beautiful and unique and just shown so elegantly with Friendly Street, there's a great picture. Of a couple of streets like this, iconic to Friendly. if you're a new home buyer in this crazy market and you're looking at a house, and we've done presentations, I've seen studies on this, it's incredible. We presenting to fourth graders. They don't care. They don't care. They're happy to be there. They're happy they're not in class, talking about trees, whatever. But we give them a picture of a neighborhood that is very on like West 11th. That is borderline highway, asphalt, sidewalk, gray, very low canopy, very hot. And then we show them a picture here of Friendly, and we say, which one would you rather live in? And they always say Friendly. And we've done this probably 7 times. If there's 2 kids that said they would prefer 11, that would be a lot. And they don't know why. They're drawn to it. What actually is the correlation is that these trees that are big and dominating the canopy, they take a long time to grow. They have a history. They have a story. They represent stability. And what they do is they add confidence to the purchaser's consideration into the home. If you're in an area that's in a more tumultuous area, you're going to have lower property value. You're going to have less canopy. The correlation is uniform. It's unbelievable. And it's so simple. Something that we walk by all the time and don't think anything of. And I'm fascinated by that. That something that, in New Jersey, no one had time for, trees. And when I moved to Oregon, specifically to Eugene, everyone has a lot of time for it, the idea of it. But when it comes to how do we elevate, uplift, fund ways to have good practices, maintain them, understand them, I don't know. It's difficult. And then you have really creative ways that you have to really come up with to advocate for these things, and it takes a lot of energy. But what I think I'm focused on, learning from all these projects, is how we need to focus on listening and working with each other instead. Because I think there's a lot of things that we all have a pretty solid idea, that would be a good idea. That if we were able to coordinate and kind of see what happens, there might be a shot that we can actually do something with these kind of projects. And that has direct financial value to your homes in Friendly. If there was a disease that came through and got rid of some of the trees, your property values would go drastically down. And that's no lie. So figuring out ways to find the significance of these things, what can the average person do? Here's a resource from the city that Scott referenced. They have approved street tree lists, planting guides. This is incredible. They put so much time into this, and it's just for the hope that if someone's curious, wants to know, they can have the tools to at least start, have the idea that they can grow a tree. Some people love it. Some people never want to play in dirt. I get it. But having the opportunity and the resources available to them, all this comes down to is that we need to find ways to activate you, the community, because in the public, the local government, the nonprofit side, and for me on the private side, this is so hard to get funded and to get things for people to understand how important this is. So when you have Scott, a city employee, saying, call us, challenge us on our practices, and when you have Erik on a nonprofit that says, look, we don't do things perfectly, but this is the best we can do, tell me how we can do better, that's the severity of it. We are so committed to figuring out, because you're the key. Here's what Friends of Trees did last year in their program. I mean, 50,000 of just volunteer work. This stuff is so exciting. It's so cool. It's an example. It's something to work with. And people have stories that they can tell about these things. There's, Friends of Trees, they have tree care guide, the amount of time and effort that we want to match, that we want to spark your interest so that we can advocate for the things that are applicable to you. And I will go into a pretty harsh transition into some of the mapping capabilities just for the sake of time. But when I did this report in 2016, this system of the dots was the best that we had. Now, recently, the city of Eugene has partnered up with Tree Plotter, which is a company that does essentially diagnostics on the density of the tree canopy. And they are able to break it down by neighborhood. So we can see right here that 20% for friendly. That's great. -2 since 2011. Okay. What does that, actually mean in terms of how many to the respective amount? When I did my report, I found out that I estimated 24%, and I think this technology within just 3-4 years is going to be much more accurate. And it's amazing because the work that it took and the time that it took me to figure out the canopy coverage is, I clicked on this site. I'm gonna put this link in the chat for you so you can look at it. You don't have to do anything. It's just available. And being able to get people to see the potential values in trees and what they do for not just the individual tree itself, but the community that they're in. We can go further and look at something like census blocks, all right? And I can start talking about equity. So we talked about vulnerable populations and canopy coverage being a correlating stat, okay? If we start doing this, green means that there's more canopy. It is a more stocked area that is appropriate for disadvantaged populations. So the center of the city is looking okay. It's the west side of town that we're looking more of the outskirts, the expansion with the infill we all know is happening to the city. What if we look at medium house income? Then we also see on the west and the center areas that we have a different kind of story. But we can follow that the corridor of the main arteries of the city coming from 99 or 11th or coming in from Springfield, that correlates back to the heat index. And so these are complex problems, but they're not necessarily on you to solve. They're on you to know and think about. These are the things that the three of us, we want to put you in a position to win. We want to make your community, your neighborhoods safer, more valuable, more meaningful. While we have the most distance we've had between people with COVID and everything like that, the availability of contractors, the price of wood at stores, people are investing into their homes and working on those projects. This is a way you can do that. And the ROI, the return on investment, that Scott and Erik said 2.5, it's really interesting because I've never heard that before. And I looked at the estimated value of the city's trees and as a total. And that total is about $5 million. Then we referenced that urban forestry has a $2 million budget. You're looking at the 2.5 right there. So the amount of input and output and appreciation for these assets that we have in so many different ways, even going past like what this turned into for me, just a curiosity, turned into a project working with the fire department, Northwest Youth Corps, ODF on wildfire preparedness and resilience in the way that we can plan and think on a community level how trees and shrubbery and vegetation interact and how we need to understand what they want to do instinctually and how we can not hurt ourselves, but also not hurt the environment that's giving us value, the reason what brings us here and the reason why we stay. So I will leave it at that. I appreciate all of your time and I apologize for us going over a couple of minutes here, but if anyone has questions or anyone for me to appropriately hand this off to, please let me know, but we really appreciate your time and would love to hear any questions, ideas. We just absolutely appreciate and love interacting with anyone interested in these topics. So thank you again.
I want to thank you and Scott and Erik. And if you are willing to hang on and people have questions, let's try the chat maybe. Or otherwise, if we're down on numbers now, that maybe raise hands would be the easiest. Are there?
Nancy Clausen has her hand up.
Nancy?
And just be aware too that, we are over, so.
Yeah. Nancy, do you have a question? You need to unmute. What?
Nancy, you're still muted. Okay.
Hello? Can
Yes,
you hear me? Can you hear me now?
yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm listening. I'm enjoying your meeting. I'm supportive of what you're doing.
But Carlos.
I have a specific question. I'm wondering when trees are in the public right of way are removed, are the stumps normally ground down?
Good one.
Excellent question. So for many years, we really prided ourselves on almost immediate or near immediate grinding of the stumps. And then we realized that in many cases, folks waited for the tree to be removed and the stump to be removed, and then they landscaped over it or paved over it or prevented a tree from being replanted or just continued. So we began to realize maybe having a placeholder as a stump is not the worst thing. It's unsightly, it's not ideal, but if we can preserve that planting site and keep it reserved for a tree, also the psychological effect, when somebody sees a stump in the right of way, they think that stump is ugly, needs to be removed, and we need to get a tree planted, as opposed to having nothing there and maybe having English ivy or something paved over. So also we have a very limited budget, and we try to prioritize the stump grinding for sites where people are very eager and ready to plant a tree. So in an ideal world, we would grind every stump immediately, but we live in a real world, and we've had to try and figure out, our goal is to get as many healthy trees in those areas as possible and use our limited budget as wisely as possible. So does that make sense?
And just on the Friends of Trees side of that, we work very closely with the city on this stump issue. And so when someone signs up for a tree with us that has a stump, it's normally, like Scott said, kind of a low priority to remove it. But when they order trees with us, we enter that into the city's database, which they check once a week. And when they see that someone's ordered a tree, they bump it to the front of the line for being removed. And it's relatively quickly removed and replanted.
Todd, I see you have a hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Real quick, I just would love to partner with Friends of Trees and Urban Forestry on creating that corridor of trees for traffic calming benefits, like we have on the Jefferson West Side neighborhood image that you showed. We talked about at the beginning the traffic calming that we've been working on with Jefferson Street in the Friendly. I think that'd be a great complement to partner with you folks and see if we can get just a good corridor of trees. It's a well-treed street as it is, but there's definitely some gaps. So I see, Scott, you're nodding, so I'll take that as a kind of a vote of approval. I'll reach out and see what we can do, as well as other areas of the neighborhood.
Yep.
Yeah, fascinating program. I really appreciated all speakers' presentations. I have had to call eWeb to report 2 different water main breaks from roots of sweet gum trees on both mine and my neighbor's property in the last few years. And each time the eWeb crew comes out, they say, "We wish the city would stop planting street trees." And it's, it's been costly in some ways, although that removal is often free. They left the stumps. And actually, the first one was in 2010. And now I didn't remove the stumps, and the sweet gums have grown back at least 10 feet tall now, which I sort of nurtured and trimmed, and because they were providing shade that the other tall trees were not able to do anymore once they were cut down. So I don't know if I'm in violation or what to do or how to do it, and it's a concern. Any advice?
Sure. I guess the first question is, what's your ideal scenario there? To have some well-behaved trees and shade, or what is your goal for the site?
Well, one is my neighbor's, and I was kind of glad that got removed because it was a hazard tree, very likely to fall branches over the sidewalk. But they missed the shade, and the other 2 are mine, and my goal probably was just be shade, but now that they've grown, they're like 3 branches each. They weren't trimmed, so there's no center trunk, and I'm concerned that they're going to be raising the sidewalk. There are raised surfaces on the sidewalk from the former tree's roots, and which I tried to get ground down, but that didn't happen. And I go out and spray paint illegally the sidewalk with fluorescent paint, so it shows the raised edges show up at night. And it's just a huge concern. I'm not really in favor of planting more street trees here, actually.
Yeah, well, that is understandable, given many people who have sweet gum PTSD rather.
Exactly.
It's they harbor a certain amount of resentment, and keep in mind that, as Erik mentioned, there are cultural practices in addition to just the species tendencies that contribute to sidewalk damage. So just because one type of tree with a given set cause problems, that is not necessarily a foregone conclusion with new trees. So I guess the short answer is reach out to us at Urban Forestry, help you to problem solve and figure out a win-win situation, really. Then, as Erik talked about, instead of the black and white or the zero-sum game, either or, we can have our cake and eat it too. We just need to be very intentional and thoughtful and really understand what's going on well. So give us a call. We'd love to help you. Look out your window, see a tree that you, instead of gnashing your teeth saying, "Oh, that darn headache," looking out and just saying, "I love that tree. So glad it's here."
The host muted me, so I couldn't say thank you. Go back to mute.
No, I'm sorry, I did that because there was some kind of background noise that was interfering with the sound. So I know you'll unmute yourself when you need to. Yeah, I'm just wondering if, I know this is a big topic and we're running out of time. We really got to end up pretty soon. But, I worry about, I want the balance between infill and trees, and that thing of, if the houses were scaled down, that would help. Maybe a combination of a little urban growth boundary nudging out a little bit, or making better use of former parking lots and car dealerships, that maybe there's a new way to buy cars and they don't need to sprawl out some new green fields kind of thing. But I do worry about the loss of more trees, at the same time that we need more housing. And I know that you kind of guys talked about that, but I'll be very interested what you come up with as a solution.
Yeah, excellent point. As Erik mentioned, we need to get creative. Why do we currently require both sides of the street to have sidewalks. If we can do road diets and reduce the size of our streets, that would have traffic calming impacts, creating disincentives for people to, for instance, I know you folks can appreciate this. If I told you, okay, you need to be at the U of O campus, center of campus in 15 minutes, are you going to think, oh, I can't drive, parking is a nightmare, I'm going to ride my bike, I'm going to walk, I'm going to carpool? That's a disincentive. And I know we are usually really averse, and understandably so, but thoughtful disincentives, as well as incentivizing doing the right thing. So shrinking our roadways and improving areas where we're planting street trees to maximize space and effectiveness and building. It's a complex problem, and you're spot on. That is the challenge of our times. Over the next 30 years, we're going to feel, because of Oregon's land use planning requirements, the urban growth boundaries, that I think we can all agree is a great idea for the state, but we're right now feeling the pressure. We have a dire need for affordable housing for folks, but yet we don't want to lose the quality of life, that neighborhood character that has brought us here and keeps us here. So call me Pollyanna, I think we can do it. We've just got to avoid that black and white thinking and think outside the box and try some thoughtful experiments, and don't assume we know the answer. Try one solution here or one possibility here, try it here, and then evaluate and then adapt and adjust as needed. That in itself sounds pretty like an oversimplification, but it's an important problem. I want to confirm that, and we need to stay mindful and open to possibilities.
And one quick thing on that is that both the city and Friends of Trees, the city's approved street tree list that Ian showed has made huge steps in the size of trees that are planted in different planting strips to reduce hardscape conflicts and sidewalk damage. And over the long run, it's going to make a big difference.
Lita's got her hand up.
Oh,
Margie.
hi. Thank you. One of my concerns as well is just the sustainability and resiliency of climate resiliency. And I know with the increased density, one of my concerns is having solar access to be available, especially in areas to where it's equitable, you know, in some of the areas where things are really crammed in and you get a lot of shadows. I wonder if that's also a consideration in tree placement and the type of trees, and so that you're not blocking like a neighbor's solar access or that type of things. Is that part of a consideration? Or, you know, I'm also concerned about the loss of the impervious ground as well. It seems like buildings are being built clear out to the sidewalk and street, and there's not much green space to plant, you know, some trees or garden or those types of things. But yeah, between the impervious ground availability and, well, I know we want canopies, but do we also have solar access? I'm hoping that that'll be more of a thing in the future where we all have ability to have solar access.
Excellent point. Yes, solar access, and not just for energy, for photovoltaic access, but for psychological well-being. We require light, especially in the dead of winter when we have the fog bog syndrome upon us, and we know that our mental well-being depends having a sight line. So that's where thoughtful landscape design and planning comes into play. And there, right now, given our tendencies in the US to be so individualistic, why can't we earmark a lot within a city block for neighborhood solar access and build efficiencies instead of having a solar array on every rooftop? That's wasteful. If we readjust our thinking and earmark one lot, we have a friend, Whitey Lewick, a longtime tree advocate here in Eugene, and his contention is that our paradigm is backwards. He would like to see things reversed in many ways, to have our streets covered with trees, and then our backyards open for food growing and light and common spaces. And that's a very compelling argument and scenario. And I say we investigate and throw off our dogmas and our the conventions, and really, like you say, what are our challenges? Energy independence, food independence, community resilience, social activation, and community spaces like the friendly food court, and just staying on top of those. Once again, I can't claim to have any answers, but I can acknowledge the importance of staying focused on these important points, and never assuming that we know the answer, because it's a moving target in many ways. What worked in the past may not be the right answer today or tomorrow.
Well, it is now almost 9 o'clock, so we probably should be winding down. To me, my takeaway is we need to keep talking, and we need to start thinking maybe a little bit differently than we're used to thinking, and which is always a challenge, and thinking differently about our trees. And, you know, like Erik's piece of it, of actually looking at them individually and their own microcosms that are going on within each of them, and how that is also an assist. So thank you again very much, Scott and Ian and Erik, for sharing all your expertise and your time. And thanks for hanging in, everybody that hung in there. And hopefully FAN will choose to do some other stuff with this, and maybe start looking at how we can engage, and if nothing else, help our neighbors that are struggling with their trees, you know, and make it so they don't want to cut them down.
Yeah, we'd definitely love to continue the conversation, and I'll make a plug for let's explore ways that we can do community matching grants to bridge the gaps between, as I mentioned, the cross-sector collaboration. That's where we're going to get some really cool case studies and projects underway, and Friendly is on the leading edge. So count us in. We'd love to collaborate and partner up.
Thank you all. Have a good